Healthcare tenders are increasingly asking about sustainability, and so many medtech companies are not prepared to answer these questions. I see this as the chance to make sustainability a strategic advantage for your medtech company. To shine a bit more light on this, I brought in Joachim Almdal. Joachim is a partner at Care Pathway Consulting and the host of the Sustainable Healthcare podcast. Joachim has spent the last 10 years helping pharma and medtech companies turn sustainability into commercial reality. In this episode, you're going to learn why looking at the full care pathway instead of just a device changes everything about how you approach sustainability. How sustainability requirements in European tenders are creating real commercial advantages right now, and what it takes to build a business case to get procurement, C-suite, and hospitals on board. And then in the end, he talks about why it is so important that you should be speaking about your sustainability advantage and why it is very crucial that you train commercial roles. I'm Lucas Penegonda, and I have helped over 40 medtech companies to be more sustainable with plastics. And here's our conversation. Hi, Joachim, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Lucas.
So, Joachim, I brought you on to answer the question, you know, how do we sell sustainability? And how do we prove that sustainability and sustainable devices have value over the lifetime of their existence, over what you would call a care pathway? So, could you describe what a care pathway is to you? How do you define that? And then let's dive into the other topics as we go.
Yeah, sure. My name is Joachim Almdal. I'm a partner in Care Pathway Consulting. And what we do is, as you described, we help pharma and medtech companies, especially to some degree healthcare providers, integrate sustainability into their organization. So taking it from a fancy strategy at the headquarter level out to something that actually creates value and makes sense and is integrated into decisions at the various parts of the organization. We work across the full value chain, so everything from R&D and clinical trials, device design, where you're an expert as well, and then also manufacturing and market access and commercial. A care pathway is defined by the European Pathway Association, EPA, as a care pathway is a complex intervention for the mutual decision making and organization of care processes for a well-defined group of patients during a well-defined period. And that's probably maybe a bit difficult to understand, but basically it's instead of just looking at the product level or a particular part, a specific part of a treatment, you actually look at the full pathway from disease onset in a patient until they get the disease and or is diagnosed, and then all the way to that they are cured and dead or dead. And what that allows you to do, whether that is in sustainability, as we're going to talk about, or health economics, is to have a much broader perspective of levers to pull and design decisions to make. And that's particularly important in sustainability, we think, and that's why we call the company Care Pathway Consulting, because depending on the particular disease or therapeutic area, the device and or drugs usually is only around 10 to 15% of the CO2 emissions. So the rest comes from all the other things that is happening in the care pathway, whether that is staying at a hospital or transportation or other things.
So that was quite a hefty definition right there, and you simplified it a little bit. So for those who are not as familiar with the terminology, could you make just an example of one care pathway, and this would be an example of that would then generalize to a general care pathway?
Yeah, for sure. So we can take something like chronic kidney disease, which is something that we worked a lot with, but it could be any others where for chronic kidney disease basically means that the function of your kidneys goes down until you basically have kidney failure, and you need a transplant to get a new kidney or go in a dialysis machine. And there, for care pathway, you would basically start the patient. The care pathway begins when they get the disease, but most of the time, this patient group don't know they have the disease until much later. So they're not very well diagnosed. And then it's a chronic disease, so the care pathway would actually stretch throughout their whole life. And then the care pathway encapsulates the boundaries are set, and that first can become a bit difficult around everything that's related to that disease. So whether that is a checkup with a general practitioner, or if they have end-stage kidney disease, that they go several times a week to get dialysis. It's a horrible disease. It could also just be, if we take a more like classic medtech example, would be that one level would just be to look at, you use an endoscopy product or something like that, and you would calculate what are the CO2 emissions or material use of this product. But a care pathway approach would then be, okay, well, there are several other steps than just the particular surgery that's happening. There's the diagnosis and the pre-talks and the transport back and forth, and maybe there's follow-ups, and for certain part of the population, maybe they have to do resurgery or other things. So that's basically it. So from a sustainability point of view, what it means is, rather than only asking how do we reduce the CO2 emissions or use better or fewer materials on the product level, which is still very important, we're now asking the question, how can we lower the CO2 emissions across the full care pathway, which is a lot more complicated, but it's also what I truly believe is needed, because otherwise we end up pushing the monkey around, which is something we see a lot in healthcare, where it doesn't matter. We've seen this from health economics, that you save 2% every year on taking a blood sample of someone else, but the overall spend still continues to grow, because you're, at the end of the day, you're sub-optimizing. And what another thing the care pathway perspective allows a lot for is to look at more preventive measures and calculate them in. So this is a bit of a broader thing, but most of our healthcare systems, they're designed to fix people once they're sick. And the care pathway perspective allows you to calculate the benefits of stopping disease progression or slowing down disease progression, sort of preventive measures.
That's a very interesting insight. So, what you're saying is that 10 to 15% of the CO2 emissions actually just come from the devices, and the rest is from other stuff. What would the other stuff consist of? And what is the biggest contributor actually? And where did you get this data from?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's something that the methodology has matured a lot on, thankfully. So it depends a lot on the disease area, but some common hotspots would be transports, patient transport. It would be the bed days and the buildings at the hospitals and other things. For some areas, like for instance chronic kidney disease that I mentioned, it also comes from a very specific part of the patient population. So in chronic kidney disease, for instance, the driver is really those who have end-stage kidney disease, where the kidneys are not functioning at all, and they have to go to dialysis, which is a lot of transport, but also very expensive, also CO2 expensive machinery that creates a lot of waste and other stuff. And how you would actually do it is that it's basically it's much like stringing together a lot of life cycle assessments so you map out what are the clinical activities. That's the first simple approach. At least you make it a generalized care pathway that you check with clinicians or health professors or others to say, okay, if for this disease, on average, you go to a general practitioner this many times. You will have to go see a specialist this many times. You will have to go get surgery this many times for a year, and then for each of those clinical activities, you calculate the CO2 emissions using a CO2 emission factor, just like you would for an LCA. So the life cycle assessment work is still an important part, because that the better that is, the more truth we have for those specific components. The key here is just that there are now a more fuller picture, and the leading methodology is from the Sustainable Healthcare Coalition, which have also made a calculator. And then there are other private companies who have also made various tools and calculators. Like AstraZeneca have made one called Caressa, and there are also, for instance, IQVIA has more complicated models where you can, much like you do in health economics, you can go beyond just a static care pathway, but you can actually, through complicated statistical markup models, you can say, okay, when we roll through the disease progression, you will have on year 2, 3, 4, and so forth, all the way out, this will be the follow-on diseases, or you will need this much more care as disease progress, and that allows you to model various interventions. But now we're getting very technical here, and that might be a bit too.
All good, all good. I'm very interested in how to calculate that. And what I would be interested even more is, you say, okay, it's not enough to just optimize the device, which is still an important part, but you should optimize for the care pathway outcome. And in my opinion, the device is crucial, and the diagnosis is crucial, and the way of treating people is crucial. So, do you have an example where before and after you had to change, or how care pathway changed, and what that made of an impact, and how was this achieved? So, how can you optimize a care pathway to better the economic and the environmental outcome?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we did one project with a medtech company where they were doing a partnership with a healthcare provider, a large global medtech company, for a project in a surgical theater. And in the initial conversations, we were brought in to support on the sustainability calculations and verify they also had a strong internal team. And there, initially, the focus was very much on the product itself. But what we realized there was actually that the largest potential CO2 savings was that for this particular medtech product around surgery, you could diagnose the need for surgery and then do the surgery right after using the same product, but also in the same session. So with the whole surgical theater setup. And yeah, that was actually much more important than waste or the product itself, that the patient didn't have to go back home. If they needed surgery, they could get surgery straight after. And there was also fewer who needed resurgery and so on, which again became much more important than the CO2 footprint from the particular product itself. The complicated thing was then that for the healthcare provider, they are still very in their procurement. They view everything through a product lens, so still very siloed. Where price focus still many times you know that, but price at the product level and not necessarily at the procedure or the full care pathway level. So it was difficult to translate that into a change in the economic models for how the healthcare provider could actually buy, and that they could capture the value from that. So another way to think about it would be in the device design teams that you're working with, and so in a way, I think, Lucas, you're maybe already working with care pathways without knowing it, because whenever you're designing sustainability in the way there, where you're saying, well, we need to design the products in a way for where we still have high accessibility, where they support adherence at the customer level. So, for instance, if you're for the pharma companies, when they're working with auto injectors, where you're injecting the medicine into yourself as a private home, a key thing there for most of these chronic diseases that require medical treatment on a regular basis, a key thing is taking the right amount of medicine at the right time. So one thing is, how do you make as low a CO2 footprint on the device as possible, or good material use, or design for disassembly, or whatever you're doing there. But and you're already, of course, doing that within the context of how do you maintain the quality and the properties needed. But what the care pathway approach provides there as well is actually a way to integrate the adherence and that on the auto injectors, for instance, and get a CO2 value of that. So, because we know that by and large from the research that adhering to what's called guideline directed medical treatment, so this support that the patients actually get the treatment that they're supposed to get according to the science and the agreements of the clinicians, which is easier said than done because it's cost and stressful everyday life of clinicians. But the more we can do that, there's actually an environmental value to creating devices that support the proper treatment. And that could also be the cold chain, for instance. So if you're, this is more on the pharma side, but if you're creating a pharmaceutical product that needs to be temperature stable within 2 to 8 degrees, or whatever that is, then how you design the product and the packaging, and then eventually also the medicine around it, has an environmental impact that goes way beyond just the particular product itself in how it's transported and storage, but even more importantly, actually, how are you able to deliver that to patients in the end?
So what I take with me from what you just said is like number one is preventive surgery is the best surgery. So preventative beats intervention or treatment overall. So you should either go for something that prevents. You should go for prevention first before you go for anything else, because if you can prevent or stop a disease or stop it from propagating or do two surgeries in one, then you can definitely save a lot of CO2. So like I've seen also a lot of materials enabling this. For example, it's like when I was 9, I broke my leg and I had a titanium implant. And the specific titanium implant, if you're 9, you're growing very rapidly, so you'll have to get the implant out. Like with an adult, you will probably leave the plate in because it doesn't really bother them. But if you're growing, you can't leave a titanium plant in. If you do something like a PLA or a magnesium plant, they are bioresorbable. So over a period of 3 to 6 months, they will resolve or dissolve in your body and be bioresorbed, which means you can save a surgery with that, and you don't have to cut open your leg again and then have crutches and all the diagnosis and all the like care that is associated with that. So that is what I take in. And then secondly, like you can also unlock a lot of value, which brings us a little bit to the second focus of what we want to achieve today. You work a lot, and you've told me this, with commercial leaders instead of R&D or sustainability professionals. So why is that, and where do they see really the value in what you're doing with this care pathway, let's say conceptualization of healthcare?
So just one quick caveat: the counterpoint to prevention is always better is overdiagnosing and overtreatment. That there are certain types of very general cancer screenings or other things which have been proven to actually not be worth the while. But that's a side note. It's a great question about the commercial part, and I think the short answer is that until sustainability really becomes commercial and really integrated into medtech and pharma, we are never going to get the impact that we need. Then you do cool projects because you think they're nice and because you have wonderful people inside of organizations who do it out of the good of their heart. We call them heroes, as opposed to a systematic or commercial approach. But you just in any, I mean, a large medtech or pharma company, at the end of the day, it's the ethos, the logic, all the governance structures are set up to treat patients and make money from treating patients. So all your sustainability work has to be able to answer that. And it's interesting. So we see a very big gap between how good medtech and pharma companies have become at reporting at the headquarter level to how good they are actually at integrating sustainability out at the national and regional sales offices or affiliates. And luckily, what we're really seeing now, especially on medtech in Europe, so it's very segmented. So in US, there are relatively few requirements, but in Europe, almost all the, at least often Western, but also Southern Europe, actually Spain, France, most of the healthcare systems there have set quite ambitious CO2 targets for reduction. So most of them are looking to reach 50% CO2 reduction maybe by 2035 and full net zero in maybe 2045 plus minus. With NHS in the UK being one of the leaders, but definitely most of the markets have targets around that. And because most of their CO2 emissions at the healthcare providers comes from what's called scope free, so their own suppliers from the industry side, that means that they are pushing that out into procurement, into tenders, into other things. And sustainability requirements is one of the fastest types of requirements that is coming into especially medtech tenders. Pharma is a bit on the slower side for like hard targets. And that means that the medtech commercial teams, especially also pharma coming, but especially medtech teams, they need to be able to respond. So our clients that we work with, they're trying to build up these capabilities and figuring out how to do it and figuring out what should be at a national level, a regional level. Do we have dedicated professionals or not? How do we respond to tenders? And there's a big gap often between the headquarter level and the device design teams. Yeah, I mean, this is like it all really there's a big, and sometimes I mean, if it's a US headquarter, they might not even be probably aware that it's a thing in Europe, and a lot of our work sometimes is just calculating the value at risk, meaning how much could you lose if you are not responding to this in Europe, because the European teams they're asking us saying, hey, we can't get the attention, we can't get the resources we need, we can't hire the people we need to respond to the tenders. So one of the things that we do is simply calculate how much would you lose on if you deliver poor on sustainability on these things. And the interesting thing there as well is so it's a new third category. We've always had price and quality. Now we also have sustainability as the third one. Most of our clients are Western or Japanese companies. They usually score very high in quality. They have a correspondingly high price. And that means that if they don't match their quality score on sustainability, the only other way to get those points in a tender is to lower the price. And then you're cutting into your margins, and nobody wants to do that.
Are you a medtech company and you want to make your device more sustainable, but you're not really sure how? With the link in the description, you can now book your free consultation. Click the link, find a time that suits you, and show up with your questions. We're here to help. So, I have a very simplistic model and I'd like you to challenge it. So, what I have is I call it tier one and tier two sustainability markets. It's like tier one would be the Nordics, the UK, maybe Ireland, Netherlands, Denmark. Yeah, you can count that to Nordics, Finland, Sweden, Norway, of course. And those would be the ones where you can probably, with the existing tender models, charge a premium to your product for about 10 to 15% ish, but not more. And then there are tier two sustainability markets where I would also count. You said US doesn't care. It's like I with one exception. California is the Europe of the US. California cares. And then you would have like France, Italy, Germany, Switzerland, Austria ish, you know, those are interested in sustainability. So they count it towards like plus points, but they're not as willing to pay a premium on it. So if you can match quality or performance and price, then it's like a tiebreaker, that kind of thing. There are markets where you can get away with a green premium, and then there are markets where you would say, you know, it is a plus point and it's just going to be the tiebreaker. And if you can match price with your competitor and performance, then you'll win more tenders. And so you gain market share. So I see sustainability, or let's be precise, you know, sustainability is, in my opinion, planet, profit, and patient. So everything in long term. So to be carried on into the future without detriment. So I would say the ecology part would give you plus points and help you gain market share, but not really demand the premium. What's your take on this?
I think two things before we talk specifics. I agree with the markets you mentioned are at the most of the forefront, but segmentation is incredibly important. Even that we see so much difference of how the tender requirements are actually executed, that even within the same country, like we have 5 regions in Denmark, soon to be four, they do things quite differently. Same in Sweden and so on. So you really need to look at what's going on in for that specific healthcare provider and in this specific disease or therapeutic area, and what are my competitors doing here as well. And so we will see that just some examples like sometimes biomaterials and packaging can be super important in one specific tender, but the overall CO2 might not be that important in that particular tender, and how the LCAs are requested and so on. So what that leads to is that it's incredibly important to be proactive, and that especially goes for the medtech companies who are and pharma strongly positioned at the product or headquarter level on sustainability, that they're leaving money on the table if they're not trying to influence the tenders. Because the tenders, it's not like it's arbitrary. But it's just it's so there. Sustainability, like you said, is a lot of things, and we're also seeing like for some points they're just asking information. For some, you get specific scoring. For some, PFAS, for instance, sometimes you are not even allowed to bid if it's not part of your product. So the commercial teams really need to get going a lot before the tenders, just like they're normally doing. I mean, once the tender is set, then the rules of the games are fixed. And you need to make sure that, of course, from a sustainability point of view, those rules make sense, but also from a commercial point of view, that they make sense. And one of the drivers is that a lot of the people are being hired in procurement come from various kinds of environmental engineers backgrounds and are very good at that, but they're not clinicians. So they're not gonna have the standard healthcare or medtech knowledge around that. And so yeah, go ahead.
Let me just hook in right there, because you know, there you said a bunch of very interesting things. Number one is like there is a little bit of a confusion what sustainability actually means, and this also translates into different healthcare systems using different metrics. Some take recyclability, some take substances of concern, some care about the CO2 footprint. But what I found more prevalently is that they care about waste and recyclability, because like this is what I use as a proxy and say very often is like hospitals don't care primarily about CO2, although they also have CO2 targets now, and this might change in the future. So you will in the future probably be more likely to be requested carbon footprints. But what is most associated with the topic sustainability is the topic waste. It's like that. This comes up with every healthcare professional. It's like, oh, there's a lot of single-use devices and there's a lot of waste. So there is a little bit of the confusion of what KPI do I use to measure my ecology. That's one thing. And then the second thing is, procurement has its game plan and its what scores and what does not score points. And also this is a little bit of the incentivation, because I've run into both of these problems with actually the same project we supported. Number one is we went into a tender, and then the tender asks about always there's a bio-based product. Oh, we said yes. Okay, do you have an ICC Plus certification? And we're like, yeah, it's physical content. We actually don't need it. But that this is a question on the tender. So if you get points for it, you'll get a certification that you do not really need, but you get it to just have the points. So people do what they're incentivized to do. Which might not lead to the right outcomes. And then the second thing that happened is went to a customer and then said, it's like we have this cool new bio-based product. We want to replace what you have here with the bio-based product. And this procurement guy was like, yeah, I love it. It's really cool. But I can't pay you more. It's like not a single cent more. It's like all my incentives say I can't. So I don't actually have the means to give you any credit to doing better on the ecology front, because my rating is all based on price. So although their corporate sustainability strategy is like we think in generations and not in quarters, big on their website, like they can't, like it hasn't percolated down to procurement. So those are things that we encountered. So I very much can speak to that. This is a fact what you just mentioned.
Yeah, and what you said, I mean, we see very little. Of course, there are examples, but we see very little green premiums or sustainability premiums. That's not really the game. And what you said about waste is absolutely true. For the nurses, especially, which is an increasingly important stakeholder group in decision making. Of course, I mean, you don't become a nurse for the money. It's just because you're very value driven, and they have to throw out so much waste every day, and that just feels bad. So you have to. One thing is segmenting on what's important for this particular therapeutic area or healthcare provider. Another is the various stakeholder groups. Just like we're always working commercially. So for nurses, waste is number one, and then you can educate them beyond. For the dedicated sustainability teams, most of the time their key focus is on the CO2 emissions of the healthcare provider as a whole, because that's where their targets are. And for doctors, it can be a bit more different, and that's also where the care pathway perspective can be interesting, because it's a good way to tie this conversation together, and how to give something for everyone, and just coming back to how to be more proactive. So one of the things in medtech, and especially pharma, is that your salespeople and basically every commercial role, unless you have been trained in something, you're not gonna take the conversation. Even if nurses or doctors are asking on sustainability, most people will glide off unless they have had training and have training materials and so on sustainability. Because that's what it's a very regulated environment in medtech and pharma. You can't just say anything. You can say very specific things around your product. So if you're not training your commercial organization on sustainability, and not just hey, we have this nice ESG report at headquarters, or we change the coffee cups in the cantina and drive electric vehicles, but actual sustainability training around the product and around the therapeutic area, then your commercial team, salespeople, are not going to have the conversation. And if they don't have the conversation, they can't influence the tender. And then you're leaving on value on the table. And we see this even with the medtech and pharma companies who are doing amazing on sustainability at as the company as a whole, really moving to green energy and manufacturing. The device design teams are doing everything they can, changing materials and all this. But unless there's a conscious, active effort to push that into commercial, they're not going to take the conversations, and then you're not going to capture the value from it.
And as I actually don't like that term too much, but that's thrown around in sustainability circles a lot. The term greenwashing. So you do your sustainability homework. You go and you do improve your devices. You use recycled materials. You make them more durable. All the good stuff. And then you don't talk about it because you're scared of being called a greenwasher.
I think that's the default in medtech and pharma, if you ask me. Whether we call it greenwashing or something else, but I think the default is to, with a few exceptions, they are not speaking about it. And it's very simple of how to do it actually, because the funny thing is that the medtech and pharma teams, they're so good at this already because we know we can't make unsupported claims. If you go in, the problems comes if you say something that's not supported, and we already know that if I come in with a endoscopy surgery instrument or something else or type of medicine, I can only say what we have data on from research. I can't say this cures cancer. I can say, well, on these and these biomarkers or clinical endpoints for this population, we have showed these results, or this can do this, and it's exactly the same in sustainability. So as long as you're not doing these, we are making surgery more green or more sustainable, but what you're saying is, well, this is our LCA, or we're using these and these materials, or we have made this and this change in our supply chain, and we would like to talk about it. You're good. What you can't do are these large claims that something is green, just like you can't say something is healthy or something is better without saying how and why.
Yes, yes, yes. This is right on the money. And people are like rather saying nothing than say something wrong. But if you're educated and if you're confident in what you do, then you will also be able to speak confidently about what you can and what your device does better. So, do you have a specific example of a client or other company that you have done a case study on that has seen commercial success and return on investment on the sustainability that they're doing?
Almost all our work is under NDA for specific projects, but I can say that some of the clients that we're working with are people like Boston Scientific, J&J, AstraZeneca, Novo Nordisk, these kinds of companies. And especially on the medtech side, we have seen people both win and lose specific tenders based on sustainability in some of the markets you mentioned, Northern Europe and so on. And I think I would just like to highlight the NHS in the UK. One, because despite being a struggling healthcare system in many ways, they're really doing amazing work on sustainability. But I think even more importantly, they are too big to ignore. I mean, Germany and Spain, France is coming along now as well, but Denmark and Norway and so on, they just weren't large enough to get corporate management attention. Like if you it for J&J or Boston Scientific, it's a rounding error. You're not gonna change anything significantly. But the UK is too big to ignore. It's too much money to leave at the table. So when they're like they're doing now with the past 2090, where they're beginning to require LCAs from suppliers, like you need to have carbon reduction plans and so on, and the way that they're training the whole clinical force, and all of this is happening in other countries too. Is just that one NHS is it's a single structure, and it's being done very top down, so it's easy to follow and it's being done relatively uniformly, but it's also just too big a market to ignore, and that's been really important in building the momentum and agency inside our clients.
Yeah, and healthcare is kind of the prisoner's dilemma here. If someone breaks the line, you're screwed. Meaning that you can try as healthcare to just block these efforts and say, all right, we're not going to do it because it's impossible, because we can't make our devices better. But then there comes a startup along and says, I can do it. I did make it more sustainable. Here you have it. You can buy it if you want to. And then the competition is out of number one, out of arguments why you can't do it, and number two, under very much pressure that you'll have to do it now too, because these guys have points in the tenders that you don't have. So you'll have to develop your own. So it's kind of like if one breaks the line, you'll have to follow kind of situation. This is also why I think that a sustainable medical devices that is basically inevitable, because we have these four forces. We mentioned the SBTI already, like the self commitments. We mentioned the customers that want this, but now you also have the competition. And if you have one competitor, and that's enough, only one competitor has something, but it's more sustainable, like you have no excuses anymore. And then in the end, we didn't talk about those, but those are also coming, the regulations. And the you can talk as much as you want about the Green Deal is slowed down and everything. Yeah, slowed down is not change of direction. It's like direction is the same. It may be a little bit slower, it may be a little bit simplified, but the direction is the same. The eco design for sustainable product regulation is going to come for a medical device, and I expect it to come in within the next 3 years, and then the race is on.
No, I think that's a very good important point that we sort of know the end game already. That the European healthcare providers, they have set ambitious net zero targets. The only way for them to reach them is to set higher end demands for industry. Because I mean, medicine and devices respectively, it's usually like 20-25% of their emissions as a healthcare provider. So there's no way that they can get to where they need to be without putting more requirements in. And I think it's very easy to forget with the US administration and Trump and what you mentioned around the slowdown with omnibus on the EU level, that European healthcare providers have not gotten that memo. They are not backing down. They are hiring more sustainability people. They are putting more demands into tenders, uh, and so it's also about looking ahead. Like you're saying, one thing is how is it now, but the direction is clear. But we are not really seeing a backing off on requirements or tenders. We're seeing it change in some areas, slow down, but the end game is clear that it's going to be a fully third category besides price and quality, which I think is very good news for Western and Japanese companies, because there's a lot of price competition, which is typically bad for them because they have high price, high quality products from Chinese competitors and others. So that's why my message is also like, if you are one of these high quality products, you're usually also pretty good on sustainability. So you might as well go and get the value from that. But that requires you to train and enable your commercial organization.
Yeah, and I think that is it. I would use the analogy of like sustainability is growing up a little. So like 10 years ago, it was more like young and wild and idealistic. Okay, let's change everything. And now we have grown up and understand that we have to make money too to survive. And you know, this is if you integrate it in your whole system and use it as a unique selling point. I think due to the four forces I mentioned, it's going to be inevitable that this is in the future going to be required. So you might as well do it now, and then have a strategic advantage when it comes into a complete necessity. And in my opinion, you have like one generation of product left to actually incorporate it. It's like for one product generation, you still can afford to ignore it, and then from then on, it's going to be a must, and it's going to be just expected. And if you do it now, you have an advantage and you can gain market share. So you also have to tell people and tell companies, there's something in it for you, because people do what they're incentivized to do.
Yeah, 100%. And then there's plenty of what we call no regret investments already, where the investments you make, you can already return back. It doesn't have to be about the future. But yeah.
Tell us a bit about what you do at Care Pathway Consulting, and then you can also follow it up with an advice you would like to give to our listeners in terms of care pathways and commercial activation.
Thank you. Yeah, so best way to reach me is on LinkedIn probably, or carepathwayconsulting.com. And what we do is we help pharma and medtech companies integrate sustainability into their local and regional teams, whether that is commercial and market access, or manufacturing, or R&D in clinical trials. And I think my best advice is really that's where you need to put it. You need to get sustainability into the roles descriptions of your various, especially commercial teams, and not just as a side dish. And you need to have it in the governance, the management reviews. That's where it creates value, and that's also where we try to change that is needed, and that it is in Europe now. It is a commercial reality, still at a low-ish point, but rising fast. It is a commercial reality that you need to respond to, and it's much better to respond to it in a structured way. We also have our own podcast called the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast, where we have an episode coming out with you soon too, Lucas. And so people can find that on Spotify or Apple or carepathwayconsulting.com. But thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So Joachim, do you have any last words for us?
No, it was great. Let's do it again.
Yeah. We should definitely do that. So this was Joachim Almdal from Care Pathway Consulting. And until the next time, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, share it with someone who can derive value from it. And let us know in the comments if you enjoyed it. If you still have questions, use the link in the description to book your free consultation. Click the link, find the time that suits you, and show up with your questions. We're here to help. Thank you very much for watching, and until the next time.